3 days after burying my wife of 47 years, I attended my granddaughter's first birthday party. In front of everyone, my daughter-in-law revealed a letter claiming her baby was my late son's child and demanded half of my $12 million estate. My son said Mom wanted you to honor her final wish. I calmly took the letter, smiled, and asked may I see it. They had no idea what my wife had prepared before she died. I'm grateful you're here. Before we dive in, leave me a comment. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night where you are? I read every single one, and your presence means more than you know. Quick note, certain details have been fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What matters most is the message at the heart of this story. 3 days after burying my wife of 47 years, I stood in my son's backyard, watching my daughter-in-law destroy everything I had left. But that morning started in silence. I woke in our master bedroom at the Lake Forest estate, the August sunlight cutting through the curtains, exactly the way it had for 4 decades, except now the bed beside me was cold. Empty. I pressed my palm against her pillow and felt nothing but expensive cotton that would never warm again. I'm Lawrence Garrett, 72 years old, retired real estate developer, widower. These were the new facts of my existence. I found myself standing in Doris's home office, staring at her antique mahogany desk. My eyes fixed on the locked bottom drawer, the one she'd made me promise never to open. "It's just my private papers, Lawrence," she'd said years ago. "When I'm gone, you'll understand." I reached for the drawer handle. My phone buzzed. A text from Brent, my surviving son. "Dad, Ivy's party today at 3. We really need you there. Family comes first." Brent Garrett, 39 years old, investment portfolio manager, my son, who'd buried his mother 72 hours ago, was texting me about a birthday party with the casual tone of someone confirming a golf tee time. Not, "I miss her too." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just a summons. Family comes first. When did you start caring about that? I didn't text back. I pulled on a suit jacket and left Doris's locked drawer for later. Something in Brent's tone made my developer instincts kick in, the same instincts that had built a $12 million real estate portfolio by learning to spot a setup before the trap closed. The drive to Evanston took 30 minutes. Brent's house was a tasteful colonial with yellow and white balloons tied to the mailbox. 40 cars lined the street. He'd invited the whole neighborhood for a 1-year-old's birthday. 1-year-old Ivy Garrett sat in a high chair on the back patio wearing a yellow dress, grinning at strangers with oblivious joy. She had dark curls and her mother's sharp chin. She looked nothing like my family. Leonie Garrett, 35, stood beside the high chair in a cream designer dress, my son's wife, formerly a luxury retail buyer, currently a stay-at-home mother with a taste for things beyond her husband's salary. She wore perfectly timed tears that glistened but never fell. Brent worked the grill, wearing a rehearsed smile and a polo shirt. He looked up when I arrived, nodded once, and returned to flipping burgers with mechanical precision. How many times had I covered for my son's mistakes, believing the next time would be different? The failed business ventures I'd quietly paid off. The credit card debt Doris had discovered and made disappear. I'd told myself he was still finding his way. Now I wondered what I'd been enabling. Vernon and Lorraine Whitfield arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a wrapped gift. Vernon, 65, retired construction company owner, my best friend for 40 years, the man who'd stood beside me at Doris's funeral and held my shoulder while I couldn't speak. Lorraine, 62, retired hospital administrator, clutched her husband's arm, Doris's closest friend, now navigating a party without her anchor. They looked as confused as I felt about being summoned 3 days after burying someone they'd known for decades. At exactly 3:30, Leonie tapped her champagne glass with a fork. The backyard fell silent. 40 guests turned toward her. She took a shaking breath, placed one hand on Ivy's head, and began her performance. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice breaking on cue. I can't keep this secret anymore. Doris would want the truth. Brent set down his spatula and moved to stand beside her, supportive, rehearsed. Ivy isn't Brent's biological daughter. Leonie continued, and the backyard, she's Thane's, my brother-in-law Lawrence's son who died last year. Before he passed, he and I had a brief relationship, and Ivy is the result. Thane, my firstborn, dead at 37 from a heart condition nobody saw coming. High school history teacher, gentle soul, the good son. Lorraine gasped. Vernon's face went carefully blank. I watched him shift his weight and look everywhere except at me. Well, I have a letter, Leonie said, producing a folded piece of paper from her pocket. From Doris. She knew about Ivy's real father. She wrote this before she died, demanding that the estate go to the rightful heir, her biological granddaughter. She held up the letter like evidence. Typed. No signature I could see from 15 feet away. The silence in that backyard was so complete. I could hear my own heart refusing to break. 40 guests stood frozen, waiting for the old widower to collapse or rage or weep. Brent finally spoke, his voice carrying the tone of a man who'd practiced this line 100 times. I've known for months, Dad. I'm willing to raise her as my own. But we need to honor what Mom wanted. Ivy deserves her inheritance. I looked at him, then at Leonie, then at Vernon, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. Are you certain? I asked. 3 words. Ice cold. Delivered with the quietest promise of something they hadn't anticipated. Brent's rehearsed expression flickered. Just for a second, I held out my hand. May I see the letter? Leonie handed it over her fingers, trembling. I read it once. Noted the generic phrasing, the typed signature, the convenient timing. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Thank you for sharing this, I said. I need some time to process. I thanked them for inviting me, kissed Ivy on the forehead. She giggled and grabbed my glasses and walked to my car without another word. 40 guests stood frozen in that backyard, waiting for an explosion that never came. As I gripped the steering wheel, the forged letter resting on my passenger seat, I smiled for the first time in 3 days. They had no idea what Doris left me in that locked drawer. The 30-minute drive from Evanston back to Lake Forest passed in silence, broken only by the sound of my turn signal and the warm August wind pushing against the windshield. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need to. My mind kept replaying that single moment at the party, Vernon Whitfield's face when I'd looked directly at him after Leonie's tearful announcement. Vernon had been my friend for 40 years. We'd built our businesses side by side, raised our sons together, buried our parents, and celebrated our grandchildren. When Doris died, he'd held my shoulder at the graveside while I couldn't speak. But in 1 second of eye contact across that decorated backyard, I watched him become a stranger. He'd looked away, shifted his weight, found somewhere else to direct his attention while his wife Lorraine gasped in shock beside him. Guilty men look away. Innocent men meet your eyes and demand explanations. I pulled into my driveway as the sun dropped below the tree line, turning the Lake Forest estate into a silhouette against the August sky. The house looked exactly as it had this morning, elegant, expensive, and completely empty. Before I went inside, I sat in the car and examined the letter Leonie had handed me with trembling fingers. I turned on the dome light and read it again, this time as a businessman instead of a grieving widower. The paper was cheap printer stock, the kind you buy in bulk at office supply stores. The margins were inconsistent, wider on the left than the right, suggesting whoever formatted it didn't know how to adjust document settings properly. The signature at the bottom read Margaret Garrett in a generic cursive font. Margaret. My wife's name was Doris. I read the error 3 times, waiting for rage or grief or something to rise up. Instead, I felt something colder settle in my chest. They'd forged a letter from a dead woman and hadn't even bothered to use her correct name. Either they were sloppy, or they believed I was too destroyed by grief to notice the details. The forged letter sat on my passenger seat like a grenade with a missing pin, dangerous, not because of what it said, but because of who believed they could use it against me. Brent had always underestimated his father. Apparently, he still did. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into my jacket pocket, and finally went inside. The house smelled like lavender, and old books, Doris's scent still clinging to the furniture, the curtains, the air itself. I walked through the dark foyer without turning on the lights, navigating by memory through rooms I'd known for 47 years. My feet carried me to her home office, the small converted bedroom where she'd managed the household accounts and written letters to her sister in Minnesota and kept whatever secrets she'd locked away from me. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, 3 days after burying the woman who'd shared every aspect of my life except whatever was in that drawer. My hand found the light switch. Her desk sat exactly as she'd left it. Antique mahogany secretary inherited from her mother. Neat stacks of paid bills, a coffee mug with her reading glasses folded inside, and the locked bottom drawer that she'd made me promise 40 years ago to never open. "It's just my private papers, Lawrence," she'd said when we'd first moved the desk into this room. "Every woman needs some corner of her life that's hers alone. When I'm gone, you'll understand. But not before. I'd kept that promise for 4 decades. Never asked what she kept locked away. Never even been curious, really. Some part of me had assumed it was old love letters from before we met, or a diary or photographs she wanted to keep private. Now I understood she'd been preparing for this. The spare key lived in her music box, a small wooden thing that played Clair de Lune when you opened the lid. I found it under the once told me it would be in case of emergency. My hands shook as I carried it back to the desk. The key slid into the lock with a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet house. Inside the drawer, organized with the same precision Doris had applied to everything in her life, I found 3 items. A sealed manila envelope, legal size, with Preston Ashford, attorney at law, printed on the front in Doris's handwriting. Below that, in red ink, "Deliver only when Lawrence needs it." A USB drive in a small plastic case labeled Wade M. in black marker, and a thick medical file in a plastic sleeve, the kind doctors use for long-term records. Thane's full name was printed on the tab, Thane Michael Garrett. The date beneath it read 13 years ago. My hands shook as I held the USB drive, and for the first time since Doris died, I felt her presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a general who'd already planned the entire war. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this was coming. Known that Brent or Leonie or someone would come for the estate after she was gone. And she'd built me an arsenal. Preston Ashford was an estate planning attorney in Chicago, one of the best. Doris had used him for her will. Whatever instructions she'd left in that envelope were meant to be executed by a professional. Wade M. I didn't recognize the name, but the deliberate labeling suggested Doris had hired someone. An investigator, maybe. Someone who'd gathered evidence she wanted me to have. I set the envelope and USB drive on the desk and lifted the medical file from its plastic sleeve. Thane's name stared back at me in bold print. My firstborn, the good son. Dead at 37 from a heart condition that had stopped him mid-sentence while teaching a class on the Civil War. The boy who'd never given me a moment's trouble, who'd married young and taught high school history and lived a quiet, decent life until his heart betrayed him. Whatever was in this file was important enough for Doris to seal it away. Whatever truth it held would neither save me or destroy my son's memory forever. But I had to know what secret my wife had been protecting all these years. I opened the medical file at 11 o'clock that night, sitting at Doris's desk with only the brass lamp for light. The first page carried Northwestern Memorial letterhead dated 13 years ago. Thane would have been 24. The diagnosis, stage 2IA testicular seminoma, cancer. My son had cancer at 24 and I'd never known. I turned pages with shaking hands, reading clinical descriptions of aggressive chemotherapy, radiation treatment, surgical intervention. The cancer had saved his life, then stolen any chance he'd ever father children. 3 fertility specialists consulted over 2 years, reached the same unanimous conclusion: complete azoospermia, irreversible infertility, 0 viable sperm count, prognosis for recovery at 0%. The treatment that killed the cancer had destroyed Thane's ability to become a biological father. The final page wasn't medical. It was Doris's handwriting on her personal stationery dated 8 months after the last specialist's report. Lawrence, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you need to understand. Thane made me promise never to tell you about the infertility. He cried all afternoon the day he got the final results, not because he couldn't have children, but because he was terrified of disappointing the father he admired most. He thought you'd see him as less of a man. I tried to tell him you'd never think that, but he made me swear. So I kept his secret for 13 years to protect our son's dignity. If anyone ever claims a child is biologically his, you'll have the proof they're lying. Use it wisely. I love you, Doris. I read the note 3 times, then pressed my palms against my eyes. Shoot, you carried this alone for 13 years, son, I whispered. I'm so sorry. But now I understood what I was holding. Thane had died 13 months ago. Ivy was 1 year old. The medical file proved with absolute scientific certainty that my eldest son could not have fathered a child at any point in the last 13 years. Leonie's entire claim was a lie, and Doris had left me the weapon to prove it. How many secrets had my wife carried alone to spare me pain, and how many battles had she fought in silence while I believed our life was simple? She'd built me an arsenal in that locked drawer while dying of heart failure, preparing for a war she wouldn't live to see. I went to bed at 2 in the morning. Sleep lasted maybe 3 hours. When dawn broke, my phone started vibrating like an angry hornet. Notifications, dozens of them. Text messages, social media alerts, emails from people I hadn't heard from in years. I found the source: a video posted 6 hours ago by Leonie Garrett. She sat in Brent's living room, wearing a plain t-shirt instead of designer clothes, minimal makeup, eyes red from crying. Ivy sat on her lap, playing with a stuffed rabbit, oblivious to the performance. I didn't want to do this publicly, Leonie said, her voice breaking on cue. But I have to speak out. My father-in-law would rather see his own granddaughter homeless than admit his son made a human mistake. He's hiding a $12 million estate while trying to erase Ivy from the family because she doesn't fit his perfect image. She wiped tears that appeared exactly when needed. Thane was a good man who made one mistake before he died. Ivy is that mistake, but she's also innocent. And now Lawrence is using his money and power to throw a 1-year-old child onto the streets. 47,000 views, 2,000 shares, comments flooding in, calling me a monster, a heartless grandfather, a man who valued money over family. At the bottom of the post, a link to a GoFundMe titled, "Help a Fatherless Child Survive Her Cruel Grandfather." I clicked through with a sick feeling. The fundraiser had been live less than $22,000. Wire transfers from across the country, small amounts from people who believed they were saving an innocent child from a wealthy tyrant. Federal wire fraud. Interstate wire transfers obtained through fraudulent representation carried penalties that would make civil court look like a parking ticket. Strangers across the internet were calling me a monster, based on a performance by a woman who'd never spent 5 minutes alone with my eldest son. People who knew nothing about Thane's character were sending money to support a lie wrapped in a baby's innocent face. I scrolled through the shares. Vernon and Lorraine had both reposted the video. Vernon wrote, "This breaks my heart. Doris would want better for this child." Lorraine added, I can't believe Lawrence would do this. Praying for you and Ivy Leonie. They didn't know they'd just made themselves accessories to federal wire fraud by amplifying a fraudulent fundraiser. Neither did the 2,000 other people who'd shared it. But a prosecutor would see a conspiracy that crossed state lines, raised money through deception, and involved multiple parties. Brent and Leonie were building their own prison one social media post at a time. I set the iPad face down on the coffee table, but I could still see Ivy's innocent face. That child had no idea she was being used as a weapon. No idea the woman holding her was planning to abandon her the moment the money cleared. The medical file upstairs proved Leonie was lying. But timing would be everything. Deploy the evidence too soon, and they'd pivot their strategy. Wait too long, and the public narrative would harden into truth. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon. Preston Ashford stood on my front porch. 58 years old, silver-haired, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Chicago's top estate planning attorney, the man Doris had trusted with her final instructions. "Lawrence," he said quietly, "I believe it's time we talked about what your wife left you." Preston Ashford didn't waste time on condolences. I led him to my home office, and he opened the sealed envelope Doris had entrusted to him 6 months before her death, spreading its contents across my desk like weapons in an arsenal. Handwritten instructions on Doris's personal stationery, dated March of this year, 3 months before the heart failure would hospitalize her for the final time. A business card for Wade Mercer, private investigator, with an Oak Park address. Detailed notes in her precise handwriting, tracking money transfers between Brent and parties she'd marked with question marks. And a timeline documenting changes in Leonie's behavior over the past year, expensive purchases, unexplained absences, meetings with Vernon that Lorraine never mentioned. Preston read Doris's opening lines aloud. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and they've made their move. Wade has everything you need. Trust him like you trusted me. The estate is protected. I made sure of it years ago. But they don't know that yet, and they'll fight anyway. Don't let them exhaust you. I left you the tools. Use them." I picked up Wade Mercer's card. So this was the Wade M from the USB drive. My wife had hired a private investigator and never told me. "How long did she know?" I asked. Preston set down the letter. "She contacted me 10 months ago about restructuring your assets. Didn't give me specifics at first, just said she wanted to make sure the estate would be protected if anything happened to either of you. Then 6 months ago, she came back with Wade's preliminary findings and updated her instructions." He pulled out a legal folder. "The Lake Forest estate, the house, the investment accounts, everything worth protecting, sits inside an irrevocable family trust you established back in 2010. Do you remember setting that up?" I nodded. "You recommended it for tax purposes." "Exactly. And that structure means the assets are completely immune to personal wills or probate claims. Doris's supposed letter, even if it were real, would hold zero legal standing against an irrevocable trust. The trust documents specify distribution terms that can't be altered by any heir's personal instructions. So Leonie's forged letter is worthless." "Legally, yes, but they don't know that yet." Preston leaned forward. "Here's what Doris understood: they'll file probate challenges anyway. Claim the trust was improperly established, that you lacked capacity when you created it, that Doris was coerced. None of it will succeed, but they'll wage prolonged litigation designed to exhaust you financially and emotionally. That's why she wanted you prepared for a long war." I thought about Brent standing beside Leonie at that birthday party playing the noble husband. About Vernon looking away when I met his eyes. About the viral video already spreading across the internet, strangers sending money to support a lie. "She was investigating them while she was dying," I said quietly. "Doris had built a fortress while pretending to tend a garden, and I'd been too blind to see the walls rising around us. While I'd sat beside her hospital bed holding her hand, she'd been coordinating with attorneys and detectives, building a defense system for a war I didn't know was coming. Preston gathered the documents. Wade has 6 months of surveillance and financial records. Call him. And Lawrence, be ready for their next move. It'll come fast. He was right. The next morning, I met Preston at his downtown Chicago office. The 34th floor, glass windows overlooking the Loop, coffee in expensive mugs. He'd called at 7, asking me to come in immediately. An emergency court order sat on his mahogany desk. Brent and Leonie's probate attorney filed this at 8 yesterday evening, the document across to me. Emergency injunction freezing all personal checking accounts, pending probate investigation. They're claiming you're liquidating assets to prevent Ivy from receiving her rightful inheritance. I scanned the legal language. Temporary restraining order. Immediate effect. All personal checking accounts frozen until further court review. How much is frozen? I asked. Preston pulled up his computer screen, typed in my account numbers. Then he smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him since Doris died. $4,200. I stared at the number. That's all. 10 months ago, Doris came to my office and restructured everything. She moved $1.8 million out of your joint personal checking into the trust structure. She left exactly enough in the personal account to cover monthly utilities, groceries, and incidental expenses. Everything else, the real money, was already protected inside the trust, where they can't touch it. My wife had fought a war against our own family in complete silence, carrying that burden alone, so I could sit beside her hospital bed, believing everything was still simple. She'd stripped our personal accounts bare and said nothing, just smiled through chemotherapy, knowing she was protecting me from a war I couldn't yet see. She knew they'd try to freeze the accounts, I said. She knew everything, Lawrence. This court order they're celebrating right now, it's worthless. They've frozen $4,000, while $12 million sits safely in a trust structure their lawyer apparently didn't bother researching. Preston leaned back in his chair. Doris played chess while they were playing checkers. I looked at the frozen account balance on the screen. $4,200 in an account that once held nearly $2 million. Doris had predicted their exact strategy: freeze. The assets starve him out, force him to settle, and she'd quietly dismantled it a year and a half before they'd even made their move. The USB drive sat in my jacket pocket. Wade Mercer's business card was in my wallet. My wife had hired a detective, tracked their movements, documented their conspiracy, and built me a complete battle plan before heart failure had stopped her heart in a hospital bed while I held her hand. It's time to call Wade Mercer, I said. Preston nodded. He's expecting you. Doris told him that when you were ready, you'd reach out. He'll tell you everything she uncovered. The detective who'd been watching my family would finally tell me the truth. I called Wade Mercer from Preston's office and arranged to meet that evening at a quiet diner in Oak Park, far enough from Lake Forest that no one would recognize us. When I walked in at 7, he was already sitting in a back booth with a leather messenger bag on the seat beside him. Wade Mercer's handshake was firm, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of a man who'd spent 6 months watching a family destroy itself frame by frame. 51 years old, former Chicago PD detective, turned private investigator specializing in matrimonial fraud. He ordered black coffee. I ordered nothing. Your wife told me you'd call at exactly this moment, Wade said, pulling a manila folder from his bag. She mapped out every move they'd make before they made it. I've been waiting for you. He spread evidence across the chipped formica table like a poker player, revealing a winning hand. Surveillance photographs, first high-resolution images, time-stamped and dated. Leonie entering the Marriott in downtown Evanston. Leonie leaving the courtyard in Skokie 2 weeks later. Leonie meeting Vernon in the lobby of a boutique hotel in Oak Park that I'd never heard of. 3 meetings over 4 months, Wade said. Vernon paid cash each time, but hotel security cameras don't lie. Your wife suspected something was wrong when she noticed Leonie asking Vernon detailed questions about estate planning at a family dinner. She hired me the next day. The photographs showed Vernon and Leonie together, sitting close, Vernon's hand on her arm in one image. Not quite intimate enough to prove an affair, but far too familiar for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law who should have been grieving together. The bank records. Wade continued sliding another document across. 4 wire transfers from Vernon Whitfield to Leonie Garrett over the past 18 months. Total $180,000. I stared at the numbers. 40,000. 50,000. 45,000. 45,000. Each transfer carefully spaced months apart, each from Vernon's personal account to Leonie's. What was he paying her for? I asked. Wade tapped the last page in his folder. That's where it gets worse. Your son Brent hired a probate litigation attorney named Gregory Marshall 10 months before your wife died. I pulled the consultation records. Marshall specializes in challenging irrevocable trusts. Brent paid him $3,000 for a preliminary assessment of how to break your family trust. 10 months before Doris died, Brent had been planning this while sitting at our dinner table smiling at his mother across the Thanksgiving turkey, all while plotting to steal her home before she was cold in the ground. How many nights had Doris lain beside me carrying this investigation, in silence watching our son plot to steal our home, while I slept, believing everything was fine. She'd hired Wade, tracked the money transfers, documented the conspiracy, and never said a word, because she didn't want to break my heart until she absolutely had to. Everything's in a private safety deposit box at First National downtown. Wade said, handing me a small brass key. Your wife opened it separately under just her name. Bank records, surveillance footage, my investigative reports, everything. She left instructions that when she died, the box would transfer to you and me as joint holders. They can't subpoena what they don't know exists. I pocketed the key. Thank you for waiting. Wade's expression softened. Your wife was one of the smartest clients I ever had. She knew exactly what was coming and built you a fortress. Don't waste it. The next morning, I drove to Evanston to meet Merritt Saxon. I'd spoken at his funeral and told stories about my son's dedication to teaching. Merritt taught English at the same high school where Thane had taught history, and when I'd called him that morning asking about Thane's personal files, he'd said 4 words: I've been waiting. Merritt's apartment was small and cluttered with books. 36 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, the careful posture of someone who'd carried a secret too long and was relieved to finally share it. Thane gave me his cloud account password 6 months before he died. Merritt said, opening his laptop. He didn't say why specifically, just that if anything ever felt wrong with the family after he was gone, I should show you what he'd saved. He pulled up a folder labeled with my name. Inside were emails Thane had sent to Doris 3 years ago expressing concern about Leonie asking suspicious questions about the estate. Warning messages about noticing Leonie and Vernon having private conversations at family gatherings. And one video file dated 6 months before Thane's death. Merritt clicked play. My son appeared on screen sitting at his classroom desk, papers graded and stacked neatly beside him. Evening light came through the windows behind him. He looked directly at the camera with the same calm expression he'd used teaching Civil War history to teenagers who'd never fully appreciated him. Dad, if you're watching this, someone has claimed I fathered a child. I'm making this recording to tell you directly that's impossible. When I was 24, I had testicular cancer. The treatment saved my life but destroyed my ability to have biological children. 3 different fertility specialists confirmed complete azoospermia, 0 viable sperm count, 0 chance of recovery. I've been infertile for 13 years. If anyone claims a child is biologically mine, they're lying, and this video is my sworn testimony. I'm recording this because Mom told me she's worried about Leonie's behavior, and I want you to have the truth from me in my own words, with verifiable evidence. The medical records are in Mom's locked drawer. I love you, Dad. Don't let them use my name for something I never did. The video ended. Metadata showed the date, time, location. All verifiable, all admissible. My son's voice filled Merritt's small apartment. Calm, clear, protective, even in death. And I understood that some love runs so deep it guards you from the grave. He knew, I whispered. He knew someone would try this. Merritt nodded. He was protecting you 6 months before his heart stopped. That's who Thane was. I watched the video a third time. My son's steady voice declaring his infertility with the same measured tone he'd used teaching reluctant sophomores. I had the medical file, the surveillance photos, the wire transfers, and now Thane's own sworn testimony recorded 6 months before he died. But none of it mattered without proving the letter Leonie presented was a forgery. Preston had already scheduled the forensic document examiner for that afternoon. Dr. Raymond Fletcher arrived at Preston's office at 2 that afternoon, carrying a briefcase full of instruments that looked more suited to a surgical theater than a law firm. The forensic examiner's magnifying glass paused over Doris's signature for exactly 3 seconds before he looked up and delivered the word I'd been waiting to hear: fabricated. Dr. Fletcher had testified in dozens of federal fraud cases, and he laid out his instruments with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. UV light scanner, digital microscope, spectral analysis equipment. The forged letter sat on Preston's conference table like evidence at a crime scene. "How the paper is aged correctly," Fletcher said, running the UV scanner across the document. That the page glowed under the purple light. But the ink is less than 2 weeks old. See this fluorescence pattern: fresh ink on old paper. The chemical coating is completely inconsistent. In an authentic document from this date, the ink would show oxidation degradation. This shows none. He switched to the digital microscope, zooming to 400% magnification. Doris's signature filled the monitor, her elegant cursive rendered in pixels. "See these compression artifacts around the signature?" Fletcher pointed to tiny distortions at the edges of each letter. "Transparency halos here and here." This was scanned from another source and digitally inserted. Classic Photoshop splice. Whoever created this didn't understand how to properly flatten layers. Preston leaned forward. "Can you determine the original source? Not from the document itself, but if you can get me her laptop or phone, I might find the project files." Fletcher adjusted his glasses. Most forgers delete the working files, but digital deletion is rarely complete. Preston pulled a laptop from his desk drawer. "Leonie's personal computer. She left it behind at your house during her last visit, and Wade managed to create a full bitstream forensic image of the drive before returning it. She attempted a factory reset afterward, but it was incompletely executed." Fletcher connected the laptop to his forensic recovery system. 20 minutes of typing and command line programs I didn't understand. Then he turned the screen toward us. "Creation date August 30th, 2023. 18 days after your wife's death. Last modified August 31st. The original file was created in Microsoft Word, exported to PDF, then printed. The project folder shows she scanned an old signature from a JPEG labeled Anniversary Card 2019 and imported it into the document template. Federal forgery under 18 U.S.C. Section 471. Maximum sentence 20 years. This is prosecutable, Fletcher said, packing his equipment. The metadata alone proves intent to defraud. Combined with the spectral analysis and the attempted evidence destruction, you have a criminal case that any federal prosecutor would take to trial. I looked at Preston. We can end this today. Preston shook his head. Not yet. You wanted to know who the biological father is first. DNA proof will close every escape route they have. Lies are like buildings constructed on sand. The taller you build them, the more spectacular the collapse when the tide comes in. Leonie had built a skyscraper on nothing, and I was about to bring the ocean. The next morning I called Vernon. My hands shook as I dialed. 40 years of friendship reduced to a tactical maneuver. Lawrence, Vernon answered on the second ring. How are you holding up? I need company, I said, forcing my voice to crack slightly. The house feels too empty. Can you come over for coffee? Silence on the line. Then, of course. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Blocks away, in an unmarked sedan, a sterile forensic collection kit in a sealed evidence bag on the passenger seat. We'd coordinated the timing down to the minute. Vernon arrived looking visibly relieved. He'd probably been expecting a confrontation, but instead found me playing the grieving widower who needed a familiar face. I made coffee in Doris's French press, the smell filling the kitchen with a normalcy that felt like blasphemy. 40 years of friendship doesn't end because of grief, I said, pouring him a cup in Doris's favorite mug, the one she'd bought in Maine during our 25th anniversary trip. I need familiar faces right now. Vernon relaxed into his chair. I'm glad you called Lawrence. After Doris, I wasn't sure if you wanted company. I know I haven't been around much. We talked about nothing. The weather, the bear's miserable season, his plans to winterize his boat. Every word felt like a knife in my chest because I knew what was coming. When Vernon excused himself to use the bathroom, I moved fast. Sterile swab from the forensic kit Wade had given me that morning. One clean pass along the coffee cup rim where Vernon's lips had touched. Into the sealed evidence tube. Into my jacket pocket. Vernon returned 5 minutes later, and we talked for another hour because anything less would have seemed suspicious. He told me about the time he'd saved my real estate company from bankruptcy in 2008, loaning me $200,000 when every bank had turned me away. How Doris had baked him a chocolate cake as thanks, and Lorraine had cried with relief that we'd survived the recession. How do you measure the weight of a friendship against the truth that will obliterate it? 40 years of loyalty, balanced against one coffee cup swabbed in secret. When Vernon finally left, I walked him to his car. He hugged me at the door, and I felt him relax into the embrace. Grateful, I think, that our friendship had survived whatever guilt was eating him alive. Thank you for coming, I said. Anytime, Lawrence. You're like a brother to me. I watched him drive away, then walked to the end of the block where Wade was waiting. I handed him the sealed evidence tube through the car window. AABB accredited laboratory, Wade said. Paternity comparison against Ivy's DNA sample from her medical records. Results in 5 business days, just before Thanksgiving. I sat in my car outside Vernon's house afterward, the evidence already sealed and speeding toward the laboratory. Vernon stood at his window waving goodbye, believing I'd come seeking comfort from an old friend. In 5 business days, I'd have genetic proof that would end his 30-year marriage and destroy the man who'd once saved my entire company from bankruptcy. The man who'd called me brother. The man who'd betrayed me with my dead son's widow. The cost of truth had never felt heavier. But Vernon's betrayal was only one piece I still needed to know the full scope of my son's crimes. 2 days after collecting Vernon's DNA, Preston called with one sentence. The forensic accountant found everything. Ms. Patricia Caldwell specialized in elder financial abuse cases, and she spread 3 years of business records across Preston's conference table with the detached precision of a pathologist performing an autopsy. The forensic accountant's spreadsheet showed 47 separate transactions, and every single one carried my son's authorization code buried in the digital signature. Your son had legitimate access to the business accounts, as your investment portfolio manager, Caldwell said, adjusting her reading glasses. That access became a weapon. Starting 3 years ago, he began systematically transferring funds to personal accounts, using authorization codes only he controlled. She turned her laptop toward me. Column after column of withdrawals. $9,800, $9,500, $8,300. Never a round number. Never the same amount twice. Each transaction was engineered to stay below $10,000. Caldwell continued. That's not accident, that's federal structuring to evade currency transaction report requirements. Banks are required to report deposits or withdrawals of $10,000 or more. By keeping each theft just under the threshold, he dodged federal detection. That structuring is its own crime under 31 U.S.C. Section 53 title, separate from the embezzlement itself. Preston leaned forward. How much total? $2.3 million over 3 years. 47 separate transactions, each carefully sized and timed to avoid triggering automated fraud detection systems. 2.3 million. The number felt surreal. I'd built my real estate business over 40 years, survived the 2008 recession. By the skin of my teeth, worked 70-hour weeks in my 50s to secure our retirement. And my son, the investment advisor I'd trusted to help protect that wealth, had been systematically stealing it while pretending to help me grow it. Where did the money go? I asked. Caldwell pulled out another document. Failed high-risk cryptocurrency investments in Brent's name. Luxury watch purchases totaling $63,000. Down payment on a Porsche Cayenne he later sold at a loss. Private country club memberships. The trail shows money laundering through multiple shell accounts he established using business addresses. Trust is like crystal. It takes years to form and clarity to admire, but one calculated blow shatters it into pieces you can never fit back together. I'd given Brent access to our accounts because he was my son, because he had the credentials, because I thought blood meant something. Because you're 72 years old, this constitutes elder financial abuse under Illinois state law, Preston said quietly. That carries enhanced criminal penalties and mandatory restitution. The federal charges alone, wire fraud, structuring, money laundering, could put him away for 20 years. Add the state charges, and you're looking at concurrent sentencing that ensures he serves substantial time. I stared at the spreadsheet. 3 years of systematic theft. He'd had dinner at our house every other Sunday. Doris had baked his favorite lemon cake for his birthday. He'd hugged her goodbye at the door and driven home in a car he'd bought with money stolen from us. There's something else, Preston said the next morning when I returned to his office. He'd been making inquiries through the legal network that attorneys use to check for conflicts of interest databases that track who's consulting whom about what. Now, Attorney Inquiry Database shows Brent contacted a trust litigation firm 7 months ago. Preston turned his computer. Early spring. March specifically. That's 2 months before your wife's health even began declining. My stomach dropped. What was the consultation about? Methods to challenge irrevocable family trusts. Legal precedents for breaking them. Grounds for undue influence claims. Duration 90 minutes. Fee $3,000 for a preliminary assessment. 7 months ago. I tried to remember what we'd been doing in March. Doris was still healthy, still strong, still gardening and hosting Sunday dinners and planning our summer trip to Maine. Still completely unaware that her son was researching how to steal her husband's home. 7 months ago, I was watching Doris plant tulip bulbs in the garden, believing my son was helping manage our wealth, while he was actually consulting lawyers about how to steal it from us. She'd been on her knees in the dirt, wearing her wide-brimmed sun hat, talking about how the purple ones would bloom in May. And that same week, Brent had been sitting in a law office asking a stranger how to break the trust that protected everything we'd built. He wasn't broken by grief, I said quietly. He's been planning this for months. I'm 7 months of premeditation, Preston confirmed. Which means this isn't a crime of passion or opportunistic fraud. This is calculated long-term conspiracy. He hired the trust lawyer in March, started the probate consultation in earnest by May. Your wife died in August. The conspiracy began while she was still alive and healthy. I thought about every Sunday dinner since spring. Brent arriving with flowers for his mother, complimenting her cooking, asking how she was feeling, playing the devoted son while secretly counting the days until she'd be gone and he could execute his plan. The timeline gets worse, Preston said, cross-referencing with Wade's surveillance reports. Leonie's first hotel meeting with Vernon was in April, 1 month after Brent consulted the trust lawyer. This wasn't 3 separate crimes that happened to intersect. This was coordinated from the beginning. Brent researched how to break the trust in March. Leonie began her relationship with Vernon in April. By May, they had a conspiracy manufacture, a false heir using Vernon and Leonie's biological child, present a forged letter from Doris, and use the paternity claim to challenge the trust Brent had already confirmed was vulnerable to fabricated grandparent demands. It was brilliant in its cruelty, methodical in its evil. I stared at the attorney consultation date on Preston's screen early spring, when the weather was finally warming, and Doris was still strong enough to host Sunday dinners. Brent would arrive with flowers, kiss his mother's cheek, compliment her cooking, and sit at our table planning how to take everything we'd built. He wasn't broken by grief. He was a predator who'd been circling for months just waiting for his mother to die. And tomorrow, I'd have to sit across from Lorraine and pretend I didn't know her husband was part of it. Lorraine called that morning, asking if I'd come for tea. Her voice carried genuine warmth, the kind you can't fake after 40 years of friendship. I accepted because refusing would have seemed strange, and because I'd learned that sometimes the hardest part of war is pretending everything's still normal. Lorraine Whitfield poured Earl Grey into bone china cups, completely unaware that DNA results arriving within days would obliterate her 30-year marriage and everything she believed about her life. She'd set out her best service, the Wedgwood pattern Doris had always admired, with tiny pink roses along the rim. Steam rose from the tea in delicate spirals, and the afternoon light through her kitchen windows made the whole scene look like something from a magazine about gracious living. I'm so glad you came," Lorraine said, settling into the chair across from me. "I've been worried about you, Lawrence. The house must feel so empty." "It does," I said honestly. That much wasn't a lie. She added sugar to her tea with a small silver spoon. "I wanted to talk to you about Leonie's situation. I know it must be difficult, but Lawrence, that little girl, is innocent. Whatever happened between Thane and Leonie Ivy didn't ask to be born into this mess." I sipped my tea and said nothing. Doris would want you to choose love over pride." Lorraine continued, her voice gentle. "Whether Ivy shares Thane's blood doesn't matter, she's still family. She's still your granddaughter in the ways that count." She believed every word. Lorraine had seen Leonie's tearful videos, read the GoFundMe description, watched the viral campaign paint me as a heartless grandfather throwing an innocent child onto the streets. And because Lorraine was fundamentally kind, because she'd spent 30 years as a hospital administrator helping people, she'd accepted the narrative at face value. "I know this viral campaign must hurt," she said. "But sometimes we have to be the bigger person. For the child's sake. Doris always said family was worth any sacrifice. The irony was so crushing, I had to set down my teacup before my hands shook. Lorraine's husband had paid Leonie $180,000, had met her at 3 different hotels, was Ivy's biological father. And Lorraine sat across from me in her beautiful kitchen with her bone china and her Earl Grey advising me to accept a lie while completely oblivious to the truth that would destroy her. Truth is a weapon that doesn't discriminate. It destroys the guilty and the innocent with equal efficiency, and Lorraine's kindness wouldn't save her from the blast radius. When the DNA results arrived, when Vernon's affair and paternity became undeniable, this gentle woman would learn that her husband had betrayed her with their dead friend's widow, that her marriage was a facade, that while she'd been defending Leonie's claims, her own husband had been at the center of the conspiracy. I couldn't warn her. Not yet. Warning her would compromise the evidence, would give Vernon time to coordinate his story with Brent, and Leonie would let them pivot their strategy before I'd closed every escape route. So I sat in Lorraine's kitchen drinking tea that tasted like ashes, listening to Doris's best friend advise me to surrender to the people destroying us both. "You've always been a good friend, Lorraine," I said when I finally left. "Doris loved you very much." "I loved her too," Lorraine said, hugging me at the door. "That's why I know she'd want you to do the right thing here. Let Leonie have what Thane wanted his daughter to have. Let there be peace." I drove home and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, watching the late summer wind move through the trees across my windshield. That evening, my office phone rang. I'd started keeping my recording app ready just in case. When I saw Brent's word before answering, "Dad." His voice had changed. No more pretense of grief or family concern. Cold, businesslike. The voice of a stranger conducting a transaction. "I'll make this simple. Sign the deed over within 10 days or I file a detailed report with the IRS about those 2013 transactions." I put the call on speaker, letting the recording capture every word clearly. "What exactly do you want, Brent?" "The Lake Forest property transferred to a trust in Ivy's name with Leonie and me as trustees until she's 18. Clean transfer, properly notarized. You can keep your investment accounts, I'm not greedy. But the house was always going to be mine eventually anyway. I'm just accelerating the timeline. And if I don't agree, then the IRS gets a very detailed letter about questionable depreciation schedules and property transfers that look an awful lot like tax evasion. I've already had an accountant review the files. The penalties alone would bankrupt you, not to mention the criminal investigation." His voice carried the casual confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "I'm willing to forgive your hostility if you just do the right thing and transfer the property. Otherwise, the IRS will be very interested in your records. When did my son become this stranger on the phone threatening his own father with federal prosecution, like a mob enforcer collecting a debt? When had the boy who'd cried at his brother's funeral transformed into this cold calculator willing to weaponize the IRS against his own family?" The recording kept running. Every word documented, every threat preserved. "I'll carefully consider what you've said," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "You have 10 days, Brent said. After that I file. And Lawrence, the viral campaign is nothing compared to what happens when the federal government starts investigating you. Think about that." He hung up. I sat in the quiet of my office, the recording file already saved and backed up. Then I emailed it to Preston with the subject line, "Federal Extortion 18 U.S.C. Section 873. Preston called back within 5 minutes. He just added felony blackmail to the list. His desperation is making him reckless. How many crimes is that now? Embezzlement, wire fraud, structuring money laundering, forgery, obstruction of justice, and now extortion. We're looking at potentially 40 years of federal sentencing if convicted on all counts. I looked at the growing case file on my laptop. Medical proof of Thane's infertility. Surveillance photos of Vernon and Leonie. Wire transfer records. Embezzlement documentation. Forgery analysis. Thane's video testimony. And now Brent's recorded extortion threat. We were missing only one final piece: genetic confirmation that Vernon Whitfield was Ivy's biological father. The DNA results would arrive within 72 hours, and then the trap would be complete. The DNA results would arrive in 72 hours. I'd spent the waiting time organizing evidence, coordinating with Preston, and trying not to think about what deployment would cost everyone involved. Then the call came at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, and it cost me something money couldn't replace: 40 years of professional respect, earned one honest handshake at a time. Lawrence, it's Gerald. Gerald Thornton had been my commercial real estate advisory partner for 4 decades. We'd collaborated on dozens of major development projects across Chicago, navigated 2 recessions together, and built mutual trust through years of honest dealing. His voice carried the uncomfortable strain of a man choosing institutional survival over personal loyalty. "The board met yesterday," he said. "They've seen the videos, Lawrence, the GoFundMe, the social media campaign. Investors are asking questions, and our general counsel is concerned about reputation risk." I said nothing. Let him finish. "I know there must be another side to this story. I know you. But the optics of association with a family scandal, regardless of the truth, are untenable right now. The board voted to suspend our advisory contract, pending resolution of the probate matter." "I understand," I said, because what else was there to say? "If this gets cleared up, if you can prove your granddaughter's claim is legitimate, and you were just being cautious, we can revisit. But right now, Lawrence, the optics are killing us." "I'm sorry." He hung up. I sat at my desk in the home office, staring at the phone for a long time. 40 years. 40 years of building trust, delivering results, conducting business with integrity. Reduced to reputation risk by a $23,000 GoFundMe and a series of videos featuring a woman crying on camera while holding a baby she planned to abandon. Doris had predicted they'd freeze my personal checking account. She'd moved assets to neutralize that attack. But she couldn't protect my professional reputation because she died before the conspiracy went public, before Leonie's performance reached 47,000 views, before strangers across the internet decided I was a monster based on a 3-minute video. Reputation is like a cathedral built stone by stone over decades. One viral video is a wrecking ball that takes minutes to demolish what generations labored to construct. Gerald's call wasn't about money. It was about something deeper: the recognition that lies travel faster than truth, and by the time you prove your innocence, the damage is already done. I looked at Doris's photograph on my desk. Silver frame, her smiling at the camera during our anniversary trip to Maine 3 years ago. Wind in her hair, ocean behind her, looking at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. "You knew this would hurt," I said to the photograph. "You prepared everything except a shield for this particular pain." But that wasn't quite true. She'd prepared me for exactly this moment by leaving me the weapons to fight back. The medical files proving Thane's infertility, Wade's surveillance photos of Vernon and Leonie, the wire transfer records showing Vernon's payments, the forensic accountant's report documenting Brent's systematic theft, the document examiner's analysis proving the forgery, the extortion recording, Thane's video testimony from beyond the grave, every weapon except one. My email chimed. Wade Mercer's name appeared in the inbox with a subject line that made my pulse spike. "Lab results, tomorrow a.m." I opened it with shaking hands. Lawrence. AABB accredited lab confirms that DNA paternity results will be delivered to my office at 6:00 a.m. tomorrow morning, October 25th. Once you have genetic confirmation, we'll have every piece needed for prosecution. Preston has been coordinating with the district attorney's office. They're ready to move when you give the word. Tomorrow, everything changes. Wade, tomorrow. 24 hours from now, I'd have genetic proof that Vernon Whitfield was Ivy's biological father, that my best friend of 40 years had betrayed me with my dead son's widow, that the conspiracy wasn't just Brent and Leonie's desperation, but a calculated three-way fraud involving the man who'd saved my company from bankruptcy in 2008. I spread the evidence folders across my desk. Medical documentation, surveillance photographs, financial records, forensic analyses, legal recordings, video testimony. An arsenal built by my dying wife who'd seen this war coming before I'd even known there was a battle. How do you measure the value of truth against the cost of everything you've built? Is vindication worth your reputation, your peace, your best friend's marriage? Lorraine would lose her husband. Gerald and the board would realize they'd abandoned an innocent man. The community groups sharing Leonie's videos would learn they'd been manipulated. Strangers who'd sent money to the GoFundMe would discover they'd funded a conspiracy. And I'd be vindicated. Proven right. Proven truthful. But Doris would still be dead. Thane would still be dead. My professional relationships would still be damaged. And I'd have destroyed a 30-year marriage between two people I'd called friends for decades, even if only one of them deserved that destruction. I picked up the phone, almost called Preston to discuss strategy, almost called Wade to ask if there was any possibility the DNA results would somehow exonerate Vernon, would show I'd been wrong, would let me put down these weapons and walk away. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a handwritten note Doris had left with the locked drawer key. I'd read it a dozen times, but I read it again now. Lawrence, by the time you read this, I'll be gone and they'll have made their move. I know you. I know you'll want to preserve peace, to avoid confrontation, to let it go for the sake of harmony. Don't. They're counting on your decency to protect their crimes. Use every weapon I left you. Protect yourself. Protect Thane's memory. Protect that baby from the people using her. I never promised this would be easy. I only promised it would be worth it. I love you. Fight. Doris. I folded the note and put it back in the drawer. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., Wade would deliver the DNA results. Vernon Whitfield would be confirmed as Ivy's biological father with 99.97% certainty. And then I'd have to decide: surrender my home to preserve what remained of my reputation, or deploy every weapon and watch the truth demolish everything in its path. Doris never promised it would be easy. She only said it would be worth it. Doris promised it would be worth it. At 5:58 the next morning, sitting in my home office with only the desk lamp for light, I found out if she'd been right. The email arrived 2 minutes early, and the first line destroyed a 40-year friendship with mathematical precision: probability of paternity, 99.27%. I read the AABB laboratory report 3 times in the pre-dawn darkness, each line cementing truths I'd suspected but hoped weren't real. Sample A, Vernon Whitfield. Probability of paternity to female child, Ivy Garrett, 99.97%. Combined paternity index, Chateau, 4. 891-03-1. Genetic markers consistent across 16 loci. Conclusion. Vernon Whitfield is the biological father of Ivy Garrett with near absolute certainty. Sample B. Thane Garrett, deceased medical records and stored biological samples. Probability 0.17, excluded as biological father. And then the line that transformed my understanding of the entire conspiracy. Sample C. Brent Garrett. DNA profile cross-referenced from business medical files. Analysis genetic comparison confirms Brent Garrett shares standard sibling markers, with Thane Garrett establishing their full brother relationship. However, comparison against subject Ivy Garrett confirms zero paternal link to Thane and a 99.97% match to sample A. Vernon Whitfield. Conclusion: Brent Garrett could not be the biological uncle through Thane, as subject carries no genetic material from Thane Garrett whatsoever. I read that paragraph 4 times. The report proved with absolute mathematical certainty that Ivy was Vernon's child, not Thane's, which meant Brent had known from day one, before the birthday party announcement, before the forged letter, before the viral campaign, that Ivy wasn't his brother's child. He hadn't been deceived by Leonie. He had been a knowing co-conspirator in a manufactured fraud from the very beginning. My own son had looked me in the eye at that party and performed grief while executing fraud. 40 years, Vernon. I whispered to the empty office. And my own son knew. Both of you knew from the very beginning. The email sat on my screen like a coroner's report. Clinical precise, reducing 40 years of friendship and 30 years of fatherhood to probability percentages and exclusionary statistics. Vernon Whitfield, the man who'd saved my business in 2008, was Ivy's biological father. Brent Garrett, my surviving son, had weaponized that child, knowing she had no connection to our family whatsoever. I forwarded the report to Preston with a 2-word subject line: "It's confirmed." He called within 5 minutes. My office, 2 o'clock. Bring everything. That afternoon, I spread the complete arsenal across Preston's conference room table like a general preparing for final battle. Medical files proving Thane's infertility. Surveillance photographs of Vernon and Leonie at 3 hotels. Wire transfer records showing Vernon's payments totaling $180,000. The forensic accountant's report documenting Brent's systematic theft. Dr. Fletcher's forgery analysis. The extortion recording. Thane's video testimony. And now the DNA results confirming Vernon's paternity and Brent's knowing participation. Wade Mercer sat at one end of the table, Preston at the other. Both of them stared at the evidence with the same expression. "This is sufficient for multiple federal indictments," Preston said quietly. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, structuring, forgery, extortion, conspiracy. We can hand it to the DA today." "No," I said. Preston looked up. "Lawrence, I want them to swear false oaths first, on camera, before a notary public. I want maximum perjury exposure and public witnesses to their lies." Wade leaned forward. "You want to let them commit additional crimes before you deploy." "I want them to stand in front of witnesses and swear under penalty of perjury that Ivy is Thane's biological daughter. I want Brent to swear he had no knowledge of any fraud. I want Vernon to swear he has no relationship to this child beyond family friendship. And then I want to produce the DNA results and watch them realize they've just handed prosecutors everything needed for extended sentences." Preston was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, cold and sharp. Public ceremony, notarized statements, sworn oaths captured on video. Then evidence deployment and immediate arrests. Exactly. The DA will need to prepare sealed warrants in advance, coordinate with local police, have officers positioned outside the ceremony location. "Can you arrange that? The DA owes me 3 favors. This'll use all of them, but yes." Preston pulled out his phone. "Where do you want to host this execution?" "My living room, my house, the place they're trying to steal." Wade nodded slowly. "Poetic. But we need to make them think they've won first. They need to believe you're surrendering." I pulled out my phone and opened a new message to Brent. Typed slowly, choosing each word with care. I've reconsidered. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm ready to discuss the transfer. I showed the screen to Preston and Wade. Perfect bait, Wade said. He'll respond within minutes. Probably propose a formal ceremony himself to make sure you can't back out. And we let him orchestrate his own trap, Preston added. Let him invite witnesses. Let him hire his own notary. Let him build the gallows thinking he's building a throne. They'd spent weeks believing they were hunters, cornering wounded prey, never realizing the entire forest had been rigged with traps while they gloated over easy pursuit. Brent had sent his extortion demand, believing I was isolated and desperate. Leonie had posted her viral videos believing public pressure would break me. Vernon had played the concerned friend, believing his secret was safe. None of them knew Doris had spent 6 months preparing for this exact war. Preston made 3 phone calls while Wade and I watched. The first to the district attorney, speaking in low tones about sealed warrants and coordinated arrests. The second, to a notary public he trusted to document everything without asking questions. The third, to a detective in the Lake Forest Police Department, arranging for officers to be positioned outside my house on whatever date we selected. "Well, the trap is set," Preston said, hanging up from the final call. "Now you just need to lure them in." I looked at the message on my phone one more time. 11 words that would convince my son I'd broken. 11 words that would bring all 3 conspirators to my living room, believing they'd won. I typed the final word, showed the screen to Preston and Wade one last time, and watched them nod approval. My thumb hovered over the send button for exactly 3 seconds. Once this text went out, there was no turning back. No mercy, no room for family sentiment. I hit send and watched the message turn from blue to delivered. Now I just had to wait for my son to take the bait and build his own gallows. 11 minutes. That's how long Brent waited before taking the bait. His text message lighting up my phone screen like a flare in the darkness, each word dripping with the barely contained triumph of a man who believes he's finally won. "Dad, I'm glad you've come to your senses. We should make this official and public. No room for you to change your mind again. I'm proposing a ceremony at Lake Forest Country Club Saturday the 23rd with witnesses present. Preston can draw up the transfer documents. This is the right decision for everyone, especially Ivy." I read it 3 times, savoring each presumptuous word. He wanted it public. He wanted witnesses. He was demanding exactly what Preston and I had hoped he'd demand: a formal ceremony with documentation and an audience to his own destruction. I called Preston immediately. "He took the bait," I said. "He wants Lake Forest Country Club, Saturday the 23rd. Public ceremony with witnesses." Preston's laugh was dark. "He's building his own gallows and doesn't even know it. Can we coordinate everything in 3 days? The venue, witnesses, document preparation, Wade's final surveillance package, and the DA's sealed warrants." Preston paused. "It's tight, but if Brent holds to this timeline, he's more desperate than we thought. That desperation will make him careless. What do I need to do?" "Nothing. Let him orchestrate. Let him invite whoever he wants. Let him hire his own notary if he insists. Every detail he controls becomes another nail in his coffin when we reveal the truth." I typed a response to Brent, choosing each word with surgical precision. "Saturday works. I'll have Preston prepare the documents. You coordinate the venue and witnesses. Let's make this official." Sent. The December wind rattled the study windows, a sound like fingernails on glass. The same restless wind that had blown the night Doris died, the night this nightmare began. Now that wind carried a different message. The storm was finally breaking, and I was no longer the one scrambling for shelter. Brent's follow-up text arrived minutes later with a guest list. Vernon and Lorraine, 3 of his business associates, 2 of Leonie's friends who'd been sharing her videos, a photographer to document the reconciliation. Each name was another witness to the perjury he didn't know he was about to commit. Terrificity, I said to the empty study. Invite everyone. The more people who watch you lie under oath, the better. I forwarded everything to Preston, who confirmed the DA was already preparing arrest warrants to be executed immediately following the ceremony. Wade was coordinating with Lake Forest Police Department. The notary Preston trusted Ms. Claire Bennett. The same one who documented the forged letter analysis would be positioned to capture every sworn statement on video. The trap was set. In 3 days, Brent would stand in front of witnesses and swear under penalty of perjury that Ivy was Thane's biological daughter. Leonie would swear she'd been faithful to my son. Vernon would swear he had no relationship to the child beyond family friendship, and then I'd produce the DNA results, the surveillance photos, the wire transfers, the embezzlement records, the forgery analysis, the extortion recording, and Thane's video testimony. Every weapon Doris had left me deployed in sequence like artillery fire. Before I tell you what Wade discovered in Leonie's digital footprint, are you still with me? Comment if you think she's planning to flee the country, or B, if you think she's innocent. Add one short reason. So I can see how you're reading this, because what comes next changes everything about custody. Note some details ahead are dramatized for narrative impact. If you prefer strictly factual retellings, you can pause here. Wade called that evening as I was reviewing. Lawrence, I need you to sit down for this one. His voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. I've been monitoring Leonie's credit card and email like we discussed. She bought a plane ticket. I felt my pulse spike. Let me guess, fleeing before we expose them. One-way ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica, December 26th, 3 days after your ceremony. Wade paused, and in that silence I heard something worse coming. Lawrence, there's no ticket for Ivy. The words hit like a physical blow. What? The reservation is solo. 1 adult, no infant, no return flight. I cross-referenced her browser's history from the laptop we imaged. She's been researching Costa Rica residency requirements countries without U.S. extradition treaties, international custody laws. I sat down the phone, suddenly heavy in my hand. She planned to abandon her own child. That baby was never her daughter Lawrence, just her golden ticket. She was going to take whatever money she could extract from you board that plane on December 26th and leave a 1-year-old behind like luggage that no longer served a purpose. The study felt too small, suddenly the air too thin. I thought I understood the depths of this conspiracy. Embezzlement, forgery, fraud, extortion, all terrible, all criminal, all prosecutable. But this was something else entirely. Does Brent know about the flight? Can't confirm, but the timing suggests coordination. 3 days after the ceremony, right when they'd expect you to be in legal chaos trying to fight a fait accompli transfer, she'd be halfway to Central America before you even realized she was gone. I looked at Ivy's photograph on my desk, the one from the birthday party, where this nightmare had started publicly. 1-year-old grinning at strangers, completely oblivious that the woman holding her had already purchased a one-way ticket that didn't include a seat for her own daughter. Forward me everything, I said. Flight confirmation, browser history, all of it. I already sent. Preston will want to add this to the custody filing. A mother planning to abandon her infant 3 days after supposedly fighting for that child's inheritance. That's not just fraud, that's abandonment, neglect, child endangerment. I'd thought I understood evil when Brent forged documents and Vernon manufactured a child. But this planning to discard a 1-year-old like luggage that no longer fit, this was a cruelty that burned through every last restraint I'd felt about destroying them. The ceremony is Saturday, I said. Her flight is Tuesday. We deploy everything Saturday afternoon, and she's in custody before she ever reaches the airport. Agreed. I'll coordinate with Preston on the timeline. After Wade hung up, I sat in the dark study holding that photograph. The fight had never been about money. For Leonie, Ivy was never a daughter, just a prop she planned to discard the moment the curtain fell. And in 3 days, I'd make sure the whole world knew it. 3 days to make sure the world knew what Leonie had planned. But first, I had to watch her celebrate her own destruction. I watched Leonie's celebration video on a loop, her tearful smile, Ivy on her hip, the caption announcing our reconciliation ceremony at Lake Forest Country Club this Saturday at 2 p.m., and felt something close to pity for someone so eager to advertise her own execution. She'd posted it Thursday evening, dressed in soft pastels with natural lighting that made her look vulnerable and hopeful. Ivy grabbed at the camera, oblivious, while Leonie delivered her performance with the skill of someone who'd practiced every word. After months of fighting, my father-in-law has finally agreed to honor Thane's wishes, she said, her voice breaking in exactly the right places. This Saturday at 2 p.m. at Lake Forest Country Club, we'll make it official. Lawrence will transfer Ivy's rightful inheritance, and we can finally start healing as a family. Thank you to everyone who stood by Ivy and me. Your support made this possible. The comments flooded in within minutes. Strangers congratulating her victory. Friends praising her perseverance. People who knew nothing about Thane's infertility or Vernon's paternity or the one-way ticket to Costa Rica departing 3 days after the ceremony. Brent shared the video with his own caption, "Family reunion. Mom and Dad would be proud. See you all Saturday at Lake Forest Country Club." 847 shares by midnight. Each one an invitation to witness their downfall, though they didn't know it yet. Lorraine commented within an hour, "Doris would be happy to see the family coming together. Vernon and I wouldn't miss it." I stared at her comment for a long time. Lorraine had no idea that in 2 days, she'd watch her husband's DNA results displayed on a screen, proving he'd fathered a child with the woman currently holding Ivy in that celebratory video. Had no idea her 30-year marriage would end in my living room in front of witnesses, but there was no way to warn her without compromising everything. Doris used to say, "Revenge was poison you drink yourself," but she'd never watched her son's widow plan to abandon their grandchild for money. She'd never seen someone weaponize an innocent baby for inheritance fraud, then purchase a solo ticket to a country without extradition. Some poisons were necessary medicine. Friday morning, Preston arrived at my house at 7 with 10 manila folders and a tactical precision that would have made a general proud. "The living room?" he said, walking through my home like he was surveying a battlefield. "We'll set up here, signing table center stage, seating arranged for maximum impact. We moved furniture for 2 hours. Preston positioned Vernon's chair directly across from where Leonie would sit, ensuring that when the DNA results appeared on the screen, Vernon would be looking straight at the woman who'd carried his biological granddaughter while planning to abandon her. Folder 1. Preston said, laying out the sequence on my desk. Thane's medical records proving complete infertility. 2 Vernon's DNA showing 99.97% paternity match to Ivy. 3 Brent's DNA showing 0 relationship, not even uncle. This one's nuclear because it proves he knew from day one. He continued through the stack. Folders 4 through 7 contained the embezzlement documentation, each transaction carefully highlighted. Folder 8 held Leonie's Costa Rica flight confirmation, with the browser history showing her research into non-extradition countries. Folder 9 contained Dr. Fletcher's forgery analysis. Folder 10 held copies of the arrest warrants already signed and sealed by the judge, waiting only for my signal. At 6 p.m. tomorrow, Preston said, pulling out his phone to confirm the coordination. "I'll text them family photo when we're ready for arrests. They'll have Brent, Leonie, and Vernon in custody within 5 minutes. "Vernon," I said quietly. "After everything, it still hurts to say his name like that. Pythie." He made his choice when he paid Leonie $180,000 and met her at 3 hotels. Preston said not unkindly, "You didn't betray him. He betrayed you." We tested the hidden cameras Wade had installed, 3 angles covering the entire living room, all streaming to a secure cloud server that would preserve every moment for prosecution. The notary, Ms. Claire Bennett, would arrive at 1:30 to set up her documentation station. She'd already been briefed on what to expect and had agreed to capture every sworn statement on official record. "When Vernon sits here," I said, positioning his chair, "and the screen shows he's Ivy's biological father, and then we reveal Leonie planned to abandon that child 3 days from now. I want him looking directly at her when the truth hits." Preston nodded. "Maximum impact, maximum witnesses, filmed from 3 angles with notarized statements creating ironclad perjury charges." The living room looked like any other family gathering space, except the evidence folders were loaded bullets. The chairs were carefully positioned, traps, and tomorrow's ceremony would be an execution disguised as a reunion. Doris had spent 6 months building these weapons. I was just the one who'd learned to aim them. "The timing has to be perfect," Preston said, reviewing his notes. "They swear their oaths first. Brent swears Ivy is Thane's biological daughter. Leonie swears she was faithful. Vernon swears he has no relationship to the child. Claire documents everything. Then we deploy evidence in sequence, each folder building on the last. And the detectives move in when, after all evidence is presented, but before anyone can leave. We want them to see everything, understand everything, realize they're caught in every lie. Then the arrests happen while they're still processing the devastation." Preston locked the evidence folders in my study safe. Each one a grenade with a precisely timed fuse. In 28 hours, Brent would place his hand on a Bible and swear Ivy was Thane's daughter. In 28 hours and 5 minutes, the world would learn he'd been lying all along. "Your wife would be proud of this preparation," Preston said as he packed his briefcase. I looked at Doris's photograph on the mantel, the one from our anniversary in Maine, her smiling at the camera with the ocean behind her. She died not knowing if her preparations would work, not knowing if I'd have the strength to deploy her weapons, not knowing if I'd choose easy surrender over hard justice. Tomorrow night the guests would arrive, and none of them knew they were coming to an execution. Tomorrow the guests would arrive. Tonight I sat alone with my ghosts. The wedding photo sat on my nightstand. Doris in white lace, me in an ill-fitting rental tux, both of us 23, and stupid with hope. And I wondered what she'd say if she could see me now, hours before I destroyed our son's widow in front of witnesses. 11 o'clock Friday night. In 15 hours, this house would fill with people expecting my surrender. I spread the evidence folders across the bed one final time, memorizing every detail. Medical files, DNA results, surveillance photos, wire transfers, embezzlement records, forgery analysis, extortion recording, Leonie's one-way ticket to Costa Rica with no seat for her daughter. I picked up the medical file documenting Thane's infertility, the cancer at 24, the treatment that saved his life, and destroyed his ability to father children. He'd kept it secret from me for 13 years because he thought it would disappoint me. "You always said I was too forgiving," I said to Doris's photograph. "You were right. I let Brent get away with too much for too long. But not anymore." Memories surfaced unbidden. Thane at 7, asking why I kept his grandmother's photo on my nightstand years after she died. I told him love doesn't have an expiration date, and he'd nodded like he understood something I was still learning. Thane at 16, covering for Brent after Brent had crashed my car and lied about it. Thane at 35, sitting in my kitchen saying, "Dad, take care of my family, 6 months before his heart would stop in the middle of a history lecture. He'd meant his wife and child. He hadn't known his wife had already betrayed him with Vernon, that the child would be Vernon's, that Brent would weaponize that child to steal everything our family had built. But I knew now. And tomorrow, Ivy would be protected from all of them. This wasn't about the estate anymore. Wasn't about vindicating my reputation, or punishing Brent's theft, or it exposing Vernon's affair. Tomorrow, I'd make sure Ivy grew up knowing the truth, and free from the people who'd turned her into a weapon before she could even speak. I put the folders away and tried to sleep. Failed. At dawn, I gave up and made coffee watching the December sun turn the frozen lake behind my house into something that looked almost hopeful. Guests started arriving at 1:30 Saturday afternoon. Brent walked in first arm around Leonie like they were attending a coronation. She wore a red dress, victorious, deliberate, the color of someone who believed she'd won. Ivy wasn't with them. Smart. They'd left her with a nanny, not wanting a crying baby to disrupt their triumph. "Dad," Brent said, his voice carrying false warmth. "Good to see you're honoring your word." Leonie, look, he even set up a proper signing table. Preston stood in the corner, positioning the final camera angle. 3 hidden feeds streaming to secure servers every moment, preserved for prosecution. Vernon and Lorraine arrived 10 minutes later. Vernon wore a dark suit, looking uncomfortable but determined. He crossed the living room and extended his hand, 40 years of friendship compressed into that gesture. "Lawrence," he said, shaking my hand with what looked like genuine relief. "Thank you for doing the right thing. Thane would appreciate this." I held his hand a second longer than necessary, looked directly into his eyes, and saw the guilt he thought he'd hidden successfully. In 6 hours, that guilt would become public knowledge. In 6 hours and 5 minutes, he'd be in handcuffs. "Thane would want what's best for Ivy," I said quietly. Lorraine hugged me at the door, her eyes misty with what she thought was happy "I'm so glad you came to your senses, Lawrence. Family is everything." Thane had been 7 when he'd asked why Grandma's photo was still on my nightstand years after she died. I'd told him love doesn't have an expiration date, and he'd nodded like he understood something I was still learning. Now I understood it differently. Love doesn't expire. Neither does betrayal. Both live forever in the spaces between people, shaping everything that comes after. More guests filtered in. The 3 business associates Brent had invited as witnesses. Leonie's 2 friends who'd been sharing her viral videos. The photographer Brent had hired to document the reconciliation for social media. Ms. Claire Bennett, the notary, setting up her station with professional precision. Everyone found seats. Preston handed out ceremony programs he'd designed to look official, complete with a schedule that ended at 3 p.m. estate transfer signing and family photograph. That photograph would be their arrest instead. 2 blocks away, Detectives Sarah Reeves and Marcus Holland sat in an unmarked car with sealed warrants and instructions to move when Preston sent the code word, "family photo." They'd been briefed on everything. They knew exactly what was about to happen. But nobody in my living room knew except Preston and me. They walked into my living room like victors entering conquered territory, not realizing they'd just stepped into a carefully constructed cage, and I was holding the only key. Brent settled into his chair with the confidence of someone who'd finally beaten his father. Leonie smoothed her red dress and smiled at her friends. Vernon sat beside Lorraine, holding her hand, believing this ceremony would preserve his secret instead of exposing it. At exactly 2 o'clock, I stood at the head of the room. 14 faces turned toward me. Brent's confident smirk, Leonie's barely contained triumph, Vernon's relieved smile, Lorraine's peaceful satisfaction. They thought I was about to surrender. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice carrying the calm of someone who'd spent 3 days preparing for this exact moment. Before we begin, I have one request. Every face turned toward me expectantly, and every word they swore under oath would become evidence for their prosecution. Every word they swore under oath would become evidence for their prosecution. I just had to get them to swear it first. My request was simple before I signed anything. Transferring Ivy's inheritance, I needed sworn, notarized statements from Brent and Leonie, affirming under penalty of perjury that everything they'd claimed about Ivy's parentage was true. I understand this might seem excessive, I said to the assembled room, keeping my voice measured and reasonable. But given the magnitude of what we're doing here, transferring a significant estate based on family relationships, I need documentation that protects everyone involved. Sworn statements properly notarized, so there's no confusion later about what was claimed and when. Brent exchanged a glance with Leonie. I watched calculation flash across his face. Was this a trap? But greed won, as I knew it would. Refusing to swear would look guilty, and he believed his lie was airtight. Of course, Dad. Brent said, his voice carrying false warmth. We have nothing to hide. I'll swear it under oath right now. Ms. Claire Bennett, the Lake County Notary Public, sat at her station with her seal and recording equipment. She documented everything from real estate closings to probate settlements in her 20-year career, but she'd never seen anything like what was about to happen in my living room. I'll need statements from both Brent and Leonie, I said, affirming that Ivy is Thane's biological daughter, that the claims about her parentage are truthful, and that no external funds have been accepted in connection with this inheritance claim. Preston handed them each a printed form. Standard legal language, penalty of perjury clauses, signature lines. The cameras hidden in 3 corners captured everything in high definition. Brent read his statement aloud first, his voice steady with false confidence. I, Brent Michael Garrett, swear under penalty of perjury that my niece Ivy Garrett is the biological daughter of my deceased brother Thane Michael Garrett. I affirm that all claims made regarding her parentage are truthful to the best of my knowledge. I have accepted no external funds in connection with this inheritance matter. So help me God. He signed with a flourish. Claire Bennett stamped it with her seal and logged the time 2:03 p.m. December 23, 2023. Leonie went next. Reading from her prepared statement, with tears gathering in her eyes, a nice touch, I thought. Performance art until the very end. I, Leonie Marie Garrett, swear under penalty of perjury that Ivy Garrett is the biological daughter of my late husband, Thane Michael Garrett, that I was faithful to him throughout our marriage, and that I know of no other potential biological father. I have accepted no external funds related to this inheritance claim. So help me God. Her voice broke on the last line. Several guests shifted in their seats, moved by her emotion. Vernon squeezed Lorraine's hand. None of them knew they were watching someone commit multiple felonies on camera. Claire Bennett sealed the second document. 2:06 p.m. I'd watched Brent lie his entire life about grades, about money, about why he'd been fired from 3 jobs, but watching him swear a lie over his brother's grave was something I'd remember until my own death. Some betrayals are so profound, they change the molecular structure of your memories, turning every past moment into evidence you should have seen it coming. Thank you, I said, accepting the notarized documents from Claire. Now, before we proceed with the actual transfer, I'd like to share something with everyone here. Something I discovered recently that I believe provides important context. I nodded to Preston, who dimmed the lights and turned on the projector we'd set up that morning. The living room wall. This is folder 1, I said, opening the first manila envelope. Medical records from Northwestern Memorial Hospital dated 13 years ago. The screen filled with Thane's medical file. testicular cancer diagnosis, treatment protocols, and then the fertility specialist reports enlarged so everyone could read them clearly. Patient exhibits complete azoospermia following high-dose chemotherapy and radiation. Prognosis for fertility recovery 0%. Patient is medically incapable of biological reproduction. The room went silent. My son Thane, I said quietly, was diagnosed with cancer at age 24. The treatment saved his life and destroyed his ability to father children. 3 different fertility specialists confirmed complete and permanent infertility. These records are certified and authenticated. Leonie's face had gone pale. Brent sat frozen, his confident smirk finally cracking. "But don't take my word for it," I continued. "Take Thane's." I pressed play on the video file Preston had cued. Thane appeared on the screen, sitting at his classroom desk, evening light behind him. My son. Alive again for these few minutes, speaking from beyond the grave with the calm voice I'd heard at 1,000 dinner tables. "Dad, if you're watching this, someone is claiming I fathered a child. I need you to know I've been medically infertile since I was 24 years old." 3 specialists confirmed it. Complete azoospermia. 0 viable sperm count. 0 chance of recovery. If anyone claims a child is biologically mine, they're lying. The room had stopped breathing. Thane's voice filled the living room, calm, measured, and utterly damning, and for the first time in months I heard my son speaking the truth his widow had tried to bury. His gentle teacher's voice, the same one that had explained the Civil War to bored teenagers, now explaining to a room full of witnesses that everything Brent and Leonie had just sworn under oath was false. "I'm making this recording to protect you from fraud," Thane continued on screen. "Any paternity claim made in my name after my death is false. I love you, Dad. Don't let them use my memory as a weapon." The video ended. The screen went dark. In the sudden silence, I could hear someone's breathing, ragged and panicked. "My son recorded that video 6 months before he died," I said, looking directly at Brent. "Because he knew someone might try exactly this." For the first time all evening, Brent's mask slipped. The confident smirk vanished, replaced by the first flicker of understanding. He'd just committed perjury on camera, swearing Ivy was Thane's daughter when medical records and video testimony proved that was impossible. But he didn't know about the second folder, and he didn't know what was in it. I opened the second folder. "Let me show you who Ivy's biological father actually is." But before I reveal the biological father, I said, opening folder 2. "Let me show you the rest of the conspiracy." The second folder contained forensic document analysis, 47 pages, proving the trust amendment bearing Doris's signature was forged. Created 18 days after her death, when her hand could no longer hold a pen. Forensic document analysis. I said, distributing copies to everyone in the room. The letter Leonie presented, supposedly written by my wife, was a clumsy digital forgery. The creator used a generic template and somehow typed the name Margaret Garrett at the bottom instead of Doris before digitally splicing a scanned signature from an old card. UV spectral analysis shows fresh ink on old paper, and digital artifacts proved the signature was imported. I looked at Brent. Doris died August 12th. This document is dated August 30th. Care to explain? Silence. Mr. Gregory Marshall, the Chicago attorney Brent had hired to represent him, and Leonie began quietly packing his files. I watched him close his briefcase with the careful movements of a man who knew his clients had just become radioactive. Folder 3. I continued opening the next envelope. Financial forensics. 47 unauthorized transfers from my business accounts over 3 years. Total amount $2.3 million. Each transaction engineered to stay below federal reporting thresholds, a technique called structuring, which is itself a federal crime. I spread the bank records across the table. Transaction after transaction, each one highlighted with Brent's authorization code, his IP address, his personal bank account, as the destination. Your authorization codes, I said to Brent. Your IP addresses, your bank accounts. You had legitimate access as my investment advisor, and you weaponized it for 3 years of systematic theft. Care to explain? More silence. Brent's confident smirk had vanished entirely. Sweat beaded on his forehead. To folder 4. I said, pulling out the next document. Audio recording dated 10 days ago. I pressed play on my phone and Brent's voice filled the living room through Preston's speakers. I'll make this simple. Sign the deed over within 10 days, or I file a detailed report with the IRS about those 2013 transactions. I'm willing to forgive your hostility if you just do the right thing and transfer the property. Otherwise, the IRS will be very interested in your records. The recording ended. 14 witnesses had just heard Brent commit federal extortion. That's 18 U.S.C. Section 873. Preston said quietly from his corner. Federal blackmail. Maximum sentence 2 years per count. I'd spent 40 years building memories with Vernon fishing trips, business partnerships, watching our sons grow up, and every single one of those memories was now contaminated by what he'd done with my son's wife. But I couldn't think about that yet. I had to finish deploying the evidence. Folder 5, I said, turning to Leonie. Flight confirmation. Costa Rica Airlines departing December the 26th, 3 days from now. I projected the email confirmation onto the screen. One-way ticket to San Jose. Departure Tuesday, December 26th, 6:45 a.m. Passenger Leonie Marie Garrett, seats 1. No return flight, I said. No ticket for Ivy. You were going to take whatever money you could extract from me, board that plane, and leave a 1-year-old behind. You researched countries without U.S. extradition treaties. You Googled Costa Rica residency requirements. You planned to abandon your daughter. Care to explain? Her hands trembled in her lap. No one spoke. The living room had become a courtroom, and the verdict was already obvious to everyone present. Gregory Marshall stood up, briefcase in hand. I'm withdrawing as counsel, he said quietly. Effective immediately, he walked out. The front door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a judge's gavel. Now, I said, opening folder 6. Let me show you who Ivy's biological father actually is. The DNA report appeared on the screen. Clinical. Precise. Devastating. DNA analysis conducted by an AABB-accredited laboratory, I read aloud. Sample A, Ivy Garrett. Sample B, Thane Michael Garrett, deceased. Probability of paternity 0%. No genetic markers consistent with biological father-daughter relationship. I paused, letting that sink in. However, I continued. There is a 99.97% probability of paternity with another individual in this room. I walked to Vernon's chair and placed the DNA report directly in front of him. His name was in bold at the top of the page. Vernon Whitfield, I said quietly. Biological father. Combined paternity index 4.89123:1. My best friend of 40 years, who swore he was helping me find the truth because he was the truth I was looking for. Vernon sat frozen, staring at the document, like it might disappear if he looked at it hard enough. Lorraine turned to him slowly. Vernon? He didn't answer. Tell me it's not real. Lorraine said, her voice barely audible. Vernon. Tell me he's lying. Vernon's silence was a complete confession. Oh, God. Lorraine whispered. You can't even deny it. Lorraine didn't scream, didn't cry. She just turned to look at her husband. And in that single look, I watched a 30-year marriage die in real time. Everything they'd built together, the house they'd bought in their 20s, the daughter they'd raised, the retirement they'd planned, 40 years of shared history. All of it crumbling in the seconds it took her to understand what his silence meant. How long? Lorraine asked, her voice hollow. Vernon still said nothing. How long were you sleeping with her, Vernon, while Doris was alive? While I was having tea with her and planning our anniversary trip, the room held its breath. 14 witnesses watching a marriage dissolve in real time, watching a woman realize that every moment of her adult life had been built on lies. Lorraine stood up slowly, her hand trembling as she reached for the DNA report. She read Vernon's name over and over like she could make it disappear through force of will. In her eyes, I saw an entire lifetime shatter in seconds, every anniversary, every promise, every moment of their 30-year marriage rewritten as a lie. She set the report down, carefully removed her wedding ring with shaking hands, and placed it on the table beside the DNA results. I want to leave, she said to no one in particular. I want to leave right now, but I still had 4 more folders to open. I'm not finished, I said quietly. And no one leaves until you hear everything. Long after the handcuffs clicked shut and the police cruisers pulled away, the silence in my living room felt heavier than the quiet of a graveyard. Lorraine's abandoned wedding ring still sat on the polished mahogany table, a small silver band catching the dim evening light. A stark reminder of 30 years of marriage shattered in a single afternoon. Leonie tried to bolt. She was halfway to the foyer when Preston stepped smoothly into her path, his attorney's posture calm but immovable. "Why, you're blocking my exit!" Leonie's voice cracked. "I'm ensuring all parties remain present for the completion of these proceedings," Preston said mildly. "Please return to your seat, Mrs. Garrett." I reached for the final 3 folders I'd kept face down on the side table. Everything before this, Thane's medical records, the forged birth certificate, the DNA results, had been prologue. These were the closing arguments. Wade Mercer's investigation timeline, I said, opening the first folder. 7 months of documentation. Bank records pulled every 2 weeks. Surveillance photos from the GoFundMe campaign launch. Text message metadata showing coordination between Leonie, Brent, and Vernon, starting last April, 3 months before Leonie ever contacted me claiming Ivy was Thane's daughter. I watched Brent's face. He'd gone very still. This wasn't impulse, I continued. This wasn't a desperate mother seeking help for her child. This was a planned conspiracy with a 7-month runway. I opened the second folder. Vernon's bank statements. Transfers totaling $180,000 from his personal accounts to an account in Leonie's name. The same account that paid for her Costa Rica travel research, her new passport expediting fees, her rental deposit in San Jose. Lorraine made a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like air leaving a punctured tire. And this, I said, laying out the third folder's contents, is the comparative breakdown of Brent's DNA against the child. It proves Thane shares 0 genetic markers with Ivy, while Vernon shares 99.97%. Since Brent knew his own brother was infertile and watched the real father pay off Leonie, this proves Brent was a full participant in fabricating a fake heir. You knew, and you helped Leonie fake the documents anyway. Brent's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Ma, that makes this not inheritance fraud," I said quietly. "It's conspiracy. Premeditated, coordinated, and sustained over months." I pulled out the final documents, the ones Preston had helped me locate in the estate archives last month. The irrevocable trust documents, signed by Doris and me in 2001, revised in 2015. The mansion, the estate, the investment accounts, all legally untouchable by paternity claims under Illinois trust law. You spent 7 months planning to steal something the law says you could never have. I'd built this trap over months. Evidence folders like dominoes arranged in precise sequence, but watching them fall in real time was different from planning it, like the difference between studying war and hearing the first gunshot. The doorbell rang. Preston glanced at his phone, then at me, and nodded once. He'd sent the text, the signal we'd arranged. I stood and walked to the foyer. Through the frosted glass, I could see two figures. I opened the door. Detective Sarah Reeves stood on my front step, mid-40s shield clipped to her belt, her partner Marcus Holland beside her. Both wore the practiced, neutral expressions of people about to ruin someone's day. "Mr. Garrett," Detective Reeves said. "We have the warrants." I stepped aside. They entered, and I led them back to the living room, where my family, what was left of it, waited in frozen tableau. Detective Reeves pulled three full. "Brent Garrett, Leonie Garrett, Vernon Whitfield. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and perjury." Leonie's scream was immediate and piercing. "You can't do this. I have a flight on Wednesday. I have plans. You have the right to remain silent." Detective Holland continued unmoved. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Vernon stood slowly, his face gray, and held out his wrists without a word. 30 years of brotherhood, of shared Christmases and business decisions and family dinners, and it ended with him staring at the floor while handcuffs clicked shut. Leonie kept screaming about her flight, about persecution, about how this was all a misunderstanding. The detectives were professional, efficient, and utterly indifferent to her protests. Brent was last. He stood turned to face me, and for the first time since this began, I saw something other than calculation in his eyes. "You were always 10 steps ahead, weren't you, Dad?" His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "I should have known. Thane was the smart one after all." Then he held out his hands and let Detective Holland cuff him. The house emptied quickly after that. Preston left with a brief touch to my shoulder. The guests filtered out in awkward silence. Within 15 minutes, the living room that had held 30 people was empty except for me and Lorraine. She sat in the same chair where she'd placed her wedding ring, staring at nothing. Did Doris know?" Lorraine's voice was barely audible. "Before she died, did she know what Vernon had done?" I sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted. "She left me every piece of evidence I needed. The medical files, the financial records, even notes about suspicious conversations. She knew something was wrong, and she made sure I'd be able to find the truth." Lorraine nodded slowly. "I stood by him. All those months you were investigating, I told Vernon he was doing the right thing, helping you." She picked up the ring from the table, held it up to catch the fading afternoon light. "I regret everything. I regret not asking questions. I regret believing him. I regret standing by the wrong person while you stood alone." She closed her fist around the ring. "I won't keep this. Some things can't be repaired. Doris used to say that justice and revenge were cousins who looked alike from a distance. Sitting with Lorraine in that quiet room, I finally understood which one I'd chosen and which one had chosen me. Lorraine left a few minutes later. She didn't say goodbye, just stood, touched my hand briefly, and walked out. I sat alone in the darkening living room, surrounded by empty evidence folders and the faint smell of Lorraine's discarded perfume. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that follows an explosion, where you're not sure if the ringing in your ears will ever stop. I'd won everything and lost everything, and I still didn't know which mattered more. But there was still Ivy, one innocent life in the wreckage, and her future still needed deciding. 3 weeks after the arrests, I sat across from Preston in his downtown Chicago office, listening to him outline the federal charges: wire fraud, forgery, perjury, elder abuse, embezzlement, blackmail, and realized the prosecutors were seeking 15 to 20 years combined for people who used to be my family. Leonie's being held without bail, Preston said, tapping the case file. The Costa Rica ticket made her an obvious flight risk. She's in Cook County pending the federal indictment, 3 weeks since Lorraine had placed her wedding ring on my table. 3 weeks since I'd watched my brother handcuffed in my foyer, and Brent, wound out on $200,000 bail, electronic monitoring passport surrendered, can't leave Illinois. Preston leaned back. The DA is going federal, Lawrence. Wire fraud because of interstate transfers, elder abuse, given your age, conspiracy charges covering the whole operation. They're talking 15 to 20 years combined if convicted on all counts. I'd expected civil court. Expected settlements. I hadn't expected the federal government to treat my family's betrayal like organized crime. What about Vernon? Preston's expression shifted. He's negotiating. His attorney approached the DA last week with an offer: full cooperation, complete testimony against Brent and Leonie, and relinquishment of all parental rights to Ivy. The words hung in the air. In exchange for what? Reduced charges. Accessory after the fact instead of conspiracy. They'd drop the embezzlement to misdemeanor financial misconduct. He's looking at probation, community service, restitution, but no prison time. Preston's jaw tightened. Assuming Lorraine doesn't destroy him in divorce court first. She filed last week. She's asking for everything. I thought about Vernon at 65, saving his own skin by abandoning his biological daughter. Let him take the deal, I said quietly. Ivy doesn't need him in her life. Preston nodded and slid a business card across the desk. Jennifer Holbrook, attorney at law. Family law and adoption services. She's the best in Chicago for custody cases, Preston said. She'll walk you through the options. I'd fought for 7 months to expose the truth, assembled evidence like ammunition, watched my enemies handcuffed and removed. But sitting in that sterile office discussing Ivy's future, I realized victory had never been the point. 2 days later, I sat in Jennifer Holbrook's Wacker Drive office, surrounded by framed photos of happy families. Jennifer was 50-something, gray-haired with reading glasses on a silver chain, and the kind of warm professionalism that put people at ease even when discussing difficult things. She'd reviewed Preston's case summary before our meeting. With both biological parents out of the picture, Vernon relinquishing rights as part of his plea deal, Leonie incarcerated, and facing 20 years, and you being Ivy's legal grandfather, through marriage to Thane, you have standing to determine her placement. She folded her hands. The question is what you want that placement to be. I'd thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. See, I'm 72, I said. I can't raise a toddler alone, not with everything she'd carry from this family. She needs a fresh start, people who aren't connected to any of this wreckage. Jennifer nodded without judgment. Adoption, then. We can arrange a closed or open placement, depending on your preference. I have 3 pre-vetted families who specialize in accepting children from complex family situations. She showed me profiles. A couple in Evanston, both teachers. A family in Oak Park with an older daughter, the mother a pediatrician. A same-sex couple in Lincoln Park who ran a bookstore and had fostered 4 children. All of them looked stable. All of them looked like they could give Ivy something I couldn't: youth, energy, normalcy. What about financial support? I asked. We can establish a trust fund that covers education, medical expenses, living costs, until she reaches adulthood. You'd appoint an independent trustee to manage distributions so the adoptive family isn't burdened with financial decisions. And visitation. Jennifer's expression softened. That's negotiable. Some families prefer closed arrangements. Others are comfortable with structured contact, especially when the biological family member poses no threat. Given your role in protecting Ivy from the conspiracy, I think most families would welcome your involvement." And I looked at the profiles again. The couple in Evanston, Sarah and Michael Bennett, both 42, both with gentle smiles. "Them," I said, "if they'll have her." Jennifer made notes. "I'll reach out this week. If they're interested, we'll arrange a meeting." The legal process takes about 6 months, but Ivy can be placed with them within weeks under foster to adopt arrangements. What good is winning if the prize is a 1-year-old child who'll grow up asking why her uncle committed fraud in her name? Her mother planned to abandon her, and her legal father died before she ever knew him. When she grows up, I said slowly, I want her to know someone fought for her, that not everyone in this family was a criminal or a liar, that Thane, her legal father, was a good man who would have loved her if he'd had the chance. "We can arrange for you to write her letters," Jennifer said gently. "For when she's older." Many adoptive families appreciate having that history documented. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jennifer pulled adoption paperwork from her file cabinet. Thick stacks outlining custody transfer, parental rights termination, trust fund, establishment, visitation schedules. "These need your signature to begin the process," she said, sliding them across the desk with a pen. The adoption papers sat on Jennifer's desk, waiting for my signature. One stroke of the pen would give Ivy a future untainted by our family's crimes and sever my last connection to Thane's memory. But before I could sign, there was one more thing I needed to do. One more conversation I needed to have. Lorraine had called 3 times that week, and I'd finally agreed to meet her. When Lorraine called me 2 weeks after walking out of my living room, her voice carried a haunting calm. Not tears, not rage, just the flat certainty of a woman who had quietly dismantled her entire past. She was calling from her daughter's house in Minnesota, having left Illinois the morning after the arrests without looking back. 3 weeks since I'd watched my own son handcuffed in my foyer. "The divorce is final as of yesterday," she said. Vernon didn't contest it. I don't think he had the energy left to fight anything anymore. I sank into the leather chair by the window. Outside, Lake Michigan stretched dark and cold beneath January clouds. "I'm sorry, Lorraine." "Juan, don't be." Her voice was steady, almost clinical. "I'm not calling for sympathy. Vernon's attorney secured the plea deal probation restitution community service. He relinquished parental rights to Ivy as part of the arrangement. The conspiracy charge was dropped. Preston told me." "Good." A pause. "I've sold the house. I'm moving to Minnesota near my daughter. I can't stay in Illinois. Every street corner holds 30 years of memories I need to leave behind. The coffee shop where Vernon proposed, the park where we used to walk, the church where we pretended to be faithful." I understood that more than she knew. Sometimes geography is the only escape from ghosts. "When do you leave?" "Next week." Another pause, longer. "Lawrence, I need to say something before I go." "Thank you." Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion breaking through. "For the truth. I know that sounds strange, thanking you for exposing my husband as a thief and a liar. But a painful truth is better than a comfortable life built on lies. If you hadn't done what you did, I'd have spent the rest of my years sleeping next to a man who stole from his dying employer and conspired to defraud you. That's not a life. That's a slow burial." I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of her words. "Doris chose well when she married you," Lorraine continued quietly. "Tell Ivy when she's old enough that not everyone in this family was broken. Tell her some of us tried to be good people. We just loved the wrong ones." "I will," I promised. The line went dead before I could say goodbye. 2 days later, I stood at the entrance to Graceland Cemetery, beneath a sky so gray it seemed to press down on the world. I carried white flowers, Doris's favorite, simple and honest, wrapped in plain paper without ribbon or fuss, exactly as she would have wanted. I found their graves easily. Side by side beneath a bare oak tree, Doris Marie Garrett, beloved wife and mother. Thane Michael Garrett, devoted son. Simple granite, no elaborate epitaphs, no lies. I laid the flowers across both graves and knelt in the frozen grass. You knew something was wrong, didn't you? I whispered to Doris's stone. You documented everything: Vernon's embezzlement, the forged records, the timeline proving Thane couldn't be Ivy's father, and left it exactly where I'd find it. I couldn't have done any of this without you. The wind stirred the oak branches, scattering frost into the cold air. I turned to Thane's grave. Your voice from beyond the grave spoke the truth you couldn't say while you were alive. Your honor is intact. Ivy will grow up knowing you were a good man. I told them everything: the conspiracy's full timeline, the arrests, Vernon's plea deal, Lorraine's dignified departure. And then I told them about Ivy. She's safe, I said, my throat tight. Find people with room in their lives for a child caught in someone else's war. She'll have everything she needs. And when she's old enough to ask questions, I'll tell her the truth. Not the ugly parts, not yet, but the important parts. That you both would have loved her the right way. I stood slowly, my knees aching from the cold ground. Behind me lay Doris and Thane, finally at peace. Ahead lay a new year, a new life, and one final piece of unfinished business: the adoption papers I still hadn't signed, and a letter that had just changed everything. The envelope had been waiting in Doris's desk drawer for 3 days, cream-colored thick paper sealed with the quiet care she brought to everything. Her elegant handwriting on the front read simply, "Lawrence, when you're ready." Dated 1 week before she died. I had walked past her office a dozen times since the funeral, unable to cross the threshold. But after laying flowers at her grave, after hearing her final words echo endlessly in my mind, I came home and forced myself to sit at her desk. My hands shook as I broke the seal. 2 pages. Her handwriting slightly unsteady from illness, but still unmistakably hers. Lawrence, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're alone in this big house, wondering what comes next. I know you'll want to preserve everything exactly as it was, turn every room into a shrine. Don't. I could hear her voice so clearly it hurt. Open the windows. Let in new light. Move the furniture. Change things. The house was never about objects or rooms, it was always about us living in them. Don't honor me by freezing time. Honor me by continuing. Tears blurred the words. I blinked them away. You have so much left to give. 47 years wasn't enough, but it was good. We were good. Remember that when grief tries to convince you otherwise. Then came the paragraph that stopped my breath entirely. I know about Vernon's embezzlement. I found the discrepancies 6 months ago. I've documented everything and left it in the filing cabinet under Medical Thane. When the time comes, you'll have what you need to protect yourself and everything we built. Don't let anyone rewrite our story. She had known. She had prepared everything, fighting for me even while dying. The final lines were written in darker ink, added later. I'll always be in every room and every decision you make. When you're standing at some crossroads wondering what I'd want, the answer is always the same: choose the living, not the dead. That's the only choice. I love you. Now go live. I sat in her chair for a long time, holding those pages, feeling the full weight of her final gift. Not closure, but permission. Permission to grieve. Permission to change. Permission to live. I folded the letter carefully and walked upstairs to the master bedroom. The balcony doors had been sealed shut since the funeral, but now I opened them. February air hit me like cold water, sharp, clean, honest. Below the winter garden lay dormant, bare branches, frozen earth, the fountain drained and covered. A cardinal landed on a gray branch, impossibly red against the pale sky. Doris had called them promise birds, proof that color always returns even to the deadest winter. My phone buzzed. Formal indictments approved. Ivy's adoption finalized. The truth documented and permanent. I had won everything I'd set out to win. But standing on that balcony, I understood that victory was never the point. The point, what I chose next. A house is just brick and mortar, I said aloud to the cold air, to her memory. What makes it home are the people who choose to keep living in it. The cardinal cocked its head as if listening. Somewhere across town, Ivy was learning her first words, building a future completely free from our family's shadows. And here I was, choosing to stay. Not frozen in grief, but moving forward exactly as Doris had commanded, choosing the living. That was the right choice. The only choice. And to you listening to my story, remember this betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. I trusted too easily for too long. I saw the signs. Doris left me evidence for a reason, and I almost ignored it out of fear of what I'd find. Don't make my mistake of staying silent when something feels wrong. The people closest to you can sometimes hurt you the most, and pretending otherwise won't protect you. It will only make the truth hurt worse when it finally surfaces. Family justice isn't about revenge, it's about protecting what's right. These dad's revenge stories aren't celebrations of cruelty. They're reminders that standing up for yourself, even against family, is sometimes necessary. I believe God gives us strength to face these battles when we need it most. True family justice means choosing truth over comfort and protecting the innocent. That's what Dad's revenge stories should teach, not bitterness, but boundaries and the courage to seek family justice when you've been wronged. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my position? If you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. And if you want more stories about resilience, truth, and standing your ground, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Your support means everything to me. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention are gifts I don't take for granted. Before you go, a reminder, this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and reflection. What matters is the truth at its core and the lessons we take forward.